Hello, everyone. Shavua Tov. I'm recording a daf ahead of time. And this daf that we're going to do now is the daf for Sunday. I don't actually know what the date is on Sunday, but daf Nun Daled 54 in the second Bava Batra. So today's daf is daf Nun Daled. I recorded daf Nun Gimel, so this is continuing from there. And hopefully that was clear. Everyone understood. We're talking about the halachot of Chazakah. And this kind of chazakah is not the chazakah that you live on a land and someone doesn't kick you out and it's a proof that you bought it. This is where there's either land that's hefker, so a ger who has no relatives dies, and so this field is unclaimed. The first person to go and make a kinyan in that land owns it. And the other cases we saw yesterday were where you purchase it, and this is your way of consummating the purchase. So, but the ger case is simpler. And it's where this land is unowned. So the first person who goes and makes a kinyan, which we call a chazakah, in that land, owns the land. We said yesterday, and we're going to describe more today, that kinyan, that chazakah, has to be something that shows ownership on the land. It has to be something that you would only do if you own the land. Things that you would do, we said yesterday, a case where there was a disaster happening. The person's land was leaking. The dike had a hole in it, and you plugged it up. It doesn't show that you own it. You're helping someone out. So that's not considered to be a chazakah. The final case we had at the end of the day yesterday, which is a fascinating case of Rav Yehuda, was the case where you just threw seeds, or you just threw a turnip seed into the ground where there already was a furrow, and you didn't water it, you didn't hoe it, you didn't do anything to it. That's not enough, even though that seed ultimately grows, because the seed grew on its own. And at the time you threw it in, you did no change in the land. Continues the Gemara today on Daf Nun Daled Amud Aleph, the fourth line from the top, first word on the line. Amar Shmuel, said Shmuel, Haiman de Pashach Dikla. A person who cuts, Pashach means you prune a dekel, a palm tree, right? So this, of course, seems like something that shows that you own the land, right? You would go to your land and you would cut a palm tree. Now, the reality is that you might also cut a branch from a palm tree, not because you own the land, but because you want the branch, right? You want the branch for firewood. You want the branch for sukkot, for your lulav. You have the lulav business, right? So if you're not necessarily protecting the land and the tree, you might be trying to get the object, which doesn't prove anything. So it says, Shmuel, if you do it adaita de dikla, if you cut it down because you want to preserve the tree, so you're pruning the tree to make it a higher quality tree, then kani, then you acquire the tree and probably the land around it because it shows ownership. But if you do it adaita de chiyuta, if you're doing it in order to, chiyuta means for the animals, you're doing it in order to give this the animals they would eat, they would chew on the branches, right? So you're doing it to feed to the animals, then lo kani, because again, you're not doing it for the purpose of the tree, you're doing it because you want the branch. And again, that doesn't prove that you care about the tree. Asking hechidami, how can you tell? You cut down a branch. How can I tell whether you cut down the branch for the quality of the tree or because you want the branch? That's well, it depends on where you cut the branches from. If you're shakam mehaigisa, if you take one branch from each side, that's pruning, right? That's symmetry. And then clearly you're trying to improve the tree, adaita didikla. But if you take kula mechadgisa, if you take everything from one side, which is easier, right? You climb up on a ladder, you can reach everything on one side. So if you take everything that's easier for you to take, then clearly you don't care about the tree, you care about the object, and then it's not a kinyan of chazakah, and it's adaita de chayuta. If you take everything from one side, it proves that you're doing it for the animals. Okay, that was the first halacha of Shmuel. The second halacha of Shmuel, which is very similar, is Amar Shmuel now, 7 lines down. Hai man dezachi zichaya, a person who clears a field. Zachi means that you clean it up, clears a field of trees, right? So basically, very often you clear a field of trees because you want to clear up the land and you want to plant there. But of course, the other reason to clear a field of trees is because you want the trees, you want the wood, you want to build a house, or you want to burn it for wood. So if you want the wood, you're not going to the land. If you're doing it because you care about the land, you're trying to clear it up, then you're kona. So says Shmuel again, adaita da'ara, if you're clearing the trees because you care about the land, then kani, then you're kona the land. If you're doing adaita ditzivi, you're doing it for firewood, tzivi means for firewood, then lo kani. And then you're not kona. Now, hechidami, how can you determine which one you're doing it for? So says the Gemara, shako rav revi vizutri. If you take the big pieces and the small pieces, you take the large pieces of wood and the twigs, then you clearly care about the land. You're trying to clear the land, adaita da'ara. But if you take only the big pieces, only the logs, and you leave behind the small, pieces, which are not good for wood anyways, wood for fire, shakal ravravi v'shavik zutri, you take the big ones and leave the small one, then clearly you only want it for firewood. Adaita detziva, you're doing it for the wood, which, because you care about the wood, you want to burn it or maybe even use it for building. But the point is you care about the wood, not the land. Vamar Shmuel, third halacha of Shmuel today. Haiman the itgal tikla, a person who removes tikla are like I'm trying to think like mounds essentially, right? So basically you're flattening the ground. There's little mounds of either dirt or stone or debris, and you're going to make it smooth. So you're smoothing out a field, right? Of course, smoothing out a field is very helpful for planting, for pulling a plow over it. But so says Shmuel, adaita to ara, if you're doing that to improve the land and cutting, like we've seen before. But if you're doing it adaita to beidari, now it's a little bit of machlok of what beidari is. The Rashbam understands that beidari is for threshing, right? So when they were threshing, they would take their grain that they harvested, they would put it on the ground and they would step on it, right, in order for it to loosen up and then throw it up in the air to winnow it. But you would needed to have a flat piece of land in order to thresh, because if you stepped on it and there was a crevice, then nothing would be agitated, right? So it requires to have a very smooth surface in order for the animals would walk over it and they would pull heavy things over it. So if you're doing it because you care about the land being flat, not because you care about the land, but because you're using it as a surface for your threshing, then lo kani, then you're not kona. Now, hechidami, how would you know which one you're doing it for? So if you're shakal, mulya, vishada, bansa, if you take, so we understand they take mulya, you take the filled dirt, like the piles that go up, and you throw them in the ditches, meaning you're basically leveling both, right? So then adaita da'ara, clearly you care about every part of the land. But if you take the mulya b'mulya v'natza b'natza, if you take the mound and throw it on another mound, you take a ditch and you dig it and you fill it up from another ditch, then clearly you're not trying to level the whole field. You only care about, this is one explanation, you only care about one spot. And if you only care about one spot, but the way you clear your spot is by taking dirt and throwing it on another pile, you basically made a bigger problem for someone trying to plow the field, right? And then it's clear that it's a daita de beidari. It's clear that you're doing it in order to have a area to thresh, not because you ultimately care about the field. One of the important points here, which we'll get to in a minute, is that you don't necessarily need to clear the whole field, right, in order to acquire a field. You can start working on a segment of it, and once it's clear that you care about this field, that might be enough to acquire the whole field, right? So here you're only clearing a segment of the field, but if you're doing it in a methodical way where everything is being flattened, that shows you care about the field. But if you're doing it in a way where only the area that you're doing is flattened, but you don't actually care where the dirt goes or where it gets filled from, then it shows that you don't care about the field. You only care about what you're doing in the field, in this case, threshing. Amar Shmuel, another case, Shmuel says, we're around halfway down, first word on the line. Haiman de patach maya ba'ara. Let's say you open up water into a field, meaning there's they used to have irrigated fields, so there was water running between the fields, and you open up, right, the stopper so that the water can enter the field. So now that is an act that you would do if you want to water a field. So if you do it a daita da'ara, you do it so that the water will flood the field and nourish the plants, then you're cunning. But if you do it adaita de kavri, if you do it in order to make a trap for the fish, then lo kani. One of the things they used to do, Rashbam goes through as well, is that the Mefarshim, that they would open the stream onto a field and then basically have an exit from the field where all the water would come out, but the fish couldn't fit out the exit. So all the fish would swim in, you then basically let out the water and the fish would stay behind, and you come in the morning or in the afternoon and your field would be full of fish flopping around that basically were caught for you, right? So it's a way to catch fish. So if you're doing it in order to catch fish, not in order to water the field, then lo kani, then you're not kona, because you don't care about the field. You care about what you're gaining from using it for these fish. Heichidami, now how can you tell the difference? Patach trei bavi. Now let's say you open two spouts, chad ma'ayol v'chad mafik, right? One in which the water comes in, a big one, so fish come with it, and the exit is a small one where only the water goes out and the fish stay behind, then clearly you care about the fish, adaita de kavri. But if you have chad bava, you just basically let the water in and it's supposed to soak the field and then go down into the soil, then adaita de ara, then clearly you care about the land and then you're kona. Okay, that is the end of Shmuel's many examples of how you make a kinyan. I think we are all very educated now. So now we are 12 lines from the bottom, and we have an interesting case. Hahi itita. There was a woman, de'achla dikla b'tafshicha. She ate a palm tree, b'tafshicha meaning she cut it down. So she would basically, there was a palm tree. What happened was that her neighbor, or it doesn't have to be her neighbor, but someone who she knew was a ger and died, and basically left this abandoned field, which had these beautiful palm trees on it. So she would go every week and she would cut down branches from the palm tree and sell it in the store or give it to her animals for food, as we saw. And she did this for 13 years. She did it for 13 years. The thing is, as we're going to see, is that she only did it from one side. She did it from what was convenient for her. Let's say it was next door to her house. So she would go out to her porch and take off the palm branches from one side. As we said earlier, that's clearly, you're doing that not because you care about the palm tree, but because you want the branches, in which case it's not actually a kinyan. Now she thought, great, I own this house, I own this palm tree. No one else, he died and there's no one else to take it over. But 13 years later, Atahu Gavra, a man shows up, always a man, right? The Bach adds, Rafik tute porta, and he loosens the ground around the tree to make it irrigated better. He hoes a little bit and digs up the dirt around the tree, which helps the water get in and strengthen the roots. And he's strengthening the tree. And now he says, I own it because I supported the tree. So Ata the Kamei de Levi, so they come in front of Levi, and the woman says, the woman says, I've been here for 13 years. And the guy said, well, she never improved the tree. The Amrila, and some say Kamei de Mar Ukva, that they brought this question in front of Mar Ukva, and you know what Mar Ukva said, or Levi? That it's the guy. Ukma bidei. It put it in his hands because she was using it for 13 years, but using it in a way that made it look like she cared about the branches, not about the tree. And he came and made an improvement on the tree, and so he owns the tree. So the woman was not very happy. Atai she came katzafcha coming, and she was screaming and complaining and shouting that it was unfair. And Amar Lei, the rabbi said to her, whether it was Levi or Mar Ukva, my avilach, I can't do anything for you. I understand this seems like an injustice, but the lo achzikta k'demachzik inshi. You did not make a chazakah the way you have to make a chazakah. And so I think I agree with you. It seems unfair, but the reality is that what you did for 13 years was not a chazakah. It was not showing signs that you own the tree. So I'm sorry, you're out of luck. Amar Rav. Now Rav says 5 lines from the bottom now. Hatzar tzura b'nechsei hager. Right. Let's say a person dies, they're a ger, and they leave behind a house and it has a wall, and you go and you're tzar tzura, you paint on the wall. You paint not color. You draw a beautiful cake on the wall. Right. This was wall art. Then kana, you are kona. Right. Because you improve the house. So it's like we said earlier. Remember, if you sod, if you do that, so painting is value. The Rav, now Rav himself, right? Lokani leginte de Rav, he was only kona the garden that went to his family. The Beirav is the family of Rav. Ella betsurta. That is in fact how he acquired it, by drawing on it. So there was a property, what was Hefker, and Rav himself went, or him and his family, I guess, and they drew on the walls beautiful drawings, and that's how they were kona. So in fact, it was a story with Rav, and that is a way to be kona something that is ownerless. Itmar. Now, the next case, which is something that we actually discussed a little bit yesterday, is what about sadeh ha'mesuyemet v'meitzareh? You have a field that is defined by borders. So unlike, very often you have an open field, and it's very hard to know where does it start and where does it end, right? This was the biggest problem, in at least in colonial America, where they were passing out fields, but probably everywhere, where you had a lot of land, but there was no clear borders, right? And so they made fences. This was not a fence, but there were meitzareh. Remember we had yesterday, and we talked about, it was this morning, but we talked about yesterday, the meitzarim of a field are the elevated edges, right? So you had a flat field, you would raise the edges so you can walk around, and also would make a natural border. So there's a field, let's say it's 2 acres, it's a large field. I think 2 acres is pretty big, and it's bordered by natural barriers that were made up. A ger lives there, the ger dies, and now it's ownerless. So who's going to go and acquire this field? So Amar Rav Huna Amar Rav, says Rav Huna Amar Rav, interestingly, that how do you acquire this field? Kivan sheikishba makosh echad. Once you hit the land with your hoe, makosh is a hoe, one time, kana kula. You go and work this field, you do the most minimal work, it's the field, it's defined as a field, one avodah in the field, you own the whole field. And Shmuel says, I completely disagree. Shmuel amar lo kana makom makusho bilvad. You acquire the area you worked. You worked 10 square feet of this field, you own 10 square feet. You don't own the 2 acres of the field. It's only what you put work into. Ask the Gemara, so it's a big machlok Rav and Shmuel. Turn the page now to Nun Dalet Amud Bet. What about a field? The easiest way to understand this is what about according to Rav? So Rav says that if there are borders and you work part of the field, you get the whole field. But what if the field has no borders, right? What if it's an open field where he owns 2 acres, but there's no natural border at the end of his 2 acres? So it says Gemara, what about a field she'ena misuyamot metzara? It doesn't have clear signs, clear borders of area around it. So ad kama. So how much do you have to work to show you own the field? You just knock in the field a little bit. How is it clear that you acquire the whole field? So Amar of Papa kida azal taira deshori v'hadar. It's where you have to go as far like a row that the shore, that the cow, the ox would come and the plow and go backwards and back, there and back, shori v'hadar. Azal v'hadar, sorry, you go and you return. And so basically you have to work the whole field. And so the easiest way to understand this is that you don't have to go in both dimensions. You just have to go in one dimension from one end to the other end and back. And by doing that, you're showing that you want to acquire the entire field, even the sides, basically. And the easiest way to understand this, which Tosfos does not agree with, is that it's going only according to Rav, that Rav says that if it's a defined field and you work part of the field, you own the whole thing. If it's not a defined field, in order to acquire the whole field, you would actually have to work a whole row from one side to the other side and come back. And that would signify that you want to work in the whole field. Now, continues the Gemara. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel. We are 2 lines from the top, last 2 words on the line. Says Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel. Very, very interesting halacha. Okay, let's say you have nichsei goy, right? You have property of a non-Jew. Okay, now this is not. Well, let's read the words and then I'll tell you what it means. Harehen kimidbar. They are like the desert. Remember, the desert is always the siman for that which is ownerless. No one owns the desert. The property of a goy is ownerless. Now, it does not mean that you can just go steal things from a goy. It means that there was a situation, we'll see this in a second, where a non-Jew owns a field, okay? He or she sells that field to a Jew, to Ruvain. And Ruvain gives $1,000 to the non-Jew to buy their field. The next step is that they are going to go to court and write a document that's going to say, whatever, I don't know what name to pick, George Washington, sign over this field to Ruvain, okay? But you've given the money already, and they have not written the shtar. So what we're going to see in a second is that a transaction could happen through either kesef or shtar. But the stam transactions among Jewish people, stam, were through shtarot. And so basically, you're in a situation where you gave the money to George, and George gave up ownership of the field because he's been paid. Ruvain does not acquire the field until he gets a shtar. And so in the interim, after you've paid and not gotten the shtar, the field is essentially ownerless because the prior owner withdrew. The new owner has not acquired it yet. And that's what Shmuel's saying, Harehin Kamidbar. They're hefker. And in fact, if before you get that shtar, someone else comes to the field and says, okay, I want this field, and they start digging, call them machzik behem zacha behem. Says Shmuel, anyone who goes and works that field can be zocha. My time, and let's read the explanation now that I just gave you. Because Oved Kochavim, and again, these are just assumptions, because if they're not true, they're not true. But there are situations in which a non-Jew, Oved Kochavim, Mechimati Zuziliyade, the moment he gets paid, he got his money, Mistaligle, he withdraws his ownership. He gives up, he relinquishes his rights to the field because he's been paid. Yisrael Lokani, now the Jew is not going to the field, Adamat Shtar Liyade, until a shtar comes to his hand. And again, it doesn't have to be that way. A Jew can acquire a field with money, but that was the regular custom, is that you would do it with a shtar, right? And so at this point, money has crossed hands, shtar has not. So the non-Jew withdrew his ownership. The Jew has not acquired it. Hilkach harihin kimidbar. Therefore, continues the Gemara, it's like hefker. And anyone who goes and lives on that field owns the field, and the whole thing will be messed up. The whole transaction will be messed up. Amalei Abaya the Rav Yosef. Now Abaya said to Rav Yosef, "This is ridiculous. Mi Amar Shmuel Hachi. Does Shmuel really say that you can just, ruin the transaction this way and that you could step in the middle and just steal the field. V'amar Shmuel, of course, the very, very famous dictum of Shmuel is dina de machuta dina, right? That you have to go and follow civil law. Umalka Amar, and the civil law is, the Malka said, the king said, Lo likni ara el bigarta, that you can only acquire a field with a star. They had again, must have been the way it was in Bavel, in the place of Shmuel and Abaye, etc. But that you can only acquire a field if you write a star. Igarta means with the letters. So meaning that if you just pass money, that does not change the ownership of a field. And so what do you mean that the non-Jew was mistalik? The non-Jew has to follow din de malchuta din as well. And so the rules of the government basically are that you have to give a star before you pass over possession, and therefore what you're saying is wrong. Amarle now, Rav Yosef said back to Abaya, Another Yudana, I don't really know how to answer your question, meaning I don't have to answer your question because I know of a case where I saw Shmuel paskin this. Because Uvda Havi Bedura de Ravata. There was an Uvda, we are halfway down by the bet in the Bach. There was a actual case that was famously known in a place called Dura de Ravata. A little bit debate what Dura de Ravata means, but some say that was the name of a place. But the other explanation is that it was a Dura, which is the place was called Dura, but it was Ravata. It had Roim, it had shepherds, right? So it was a village where a lot of shepherds. Remember, shepherds are people who don't have very set houses. They go out there, they watch their animals for months at a time, maybe. They're living pretty rough. So it was a pretty rough Western village, and there was a Yisrael. There was a case where there was a Jew, the Zavan Arami of Kochavim. He bought a piece of land from a non-Jew, and he gave the money, but he didn't get a star yet. And Ata Yisrael Achrina, and another Jew, so Reuven bought it from the non-Jew, and then Shimon came along and Rafik Baporta, and he started hoeing the field. He said, "Oh, great! The non-Jew picked up and moved away. This is a Hefker field. I'm going to work it." And now the first Jew, Reuven, came to Shimon and said, "What are you talking about? I gave him money. He just hasn't given me a star yet." And Ata the Kamed Rav Yehuda, and this story came in front of Rav Yehuda, and Rav Yehuda, reading inside, Ukma biyada desheni. Rav Yehuda said, no, in fact, the field belongs to the second Jew, to Shimon. Now, of course, Rav Yehuda is not Shmuel, right? But Rav Yehuda was a very, very committed Talmud of Shmuel. So if Rav Yehuda's paskin that way, we seem to be questioning Shmuel must have paskin in a practical case that if a non-Jew sells something to a Jew and the non-Jew gets the money, they're out of the picture. The Jew does not acquire the field until he gets a star. And in the interim, after he's given money and not gotten a star, it's basically free. And if another person comes along and acquires it, they keep it. So I don't care. I don't know how you're going to answer Dina de Malchuta Dina. But I'm telling you, there was a story, and this is how Rav Yehuda paskind. Amar Le, no. He said back to him, you're making a big mistake. That case was not the same case. Dura Duravata Kamra, you're telling me a case from the village of the shepherds? In that case, it was a completely different reason. Hatam Bagi Mitamru Havi. There, it was a hidden field, meaning it was off the, what do you call it when you're off the record? It was off the grid, basically. And Inu Gufayu, the people who lived there themselves, Lohavi Yavi Taska the Malka, they didn't pay taxes to the king. So they basically lived in an unincorporated village, right? Mitamri literally means hidden, but they were unincorporated illegally, and they didn't acknowledge, they didn't officially announce we live here, and therefore they lived there without paying taxes. And so basically the non-Jew lived in this field. He went and sold it to a Jew, but it turns out that the non-Jew has no right to the field because Malka Amar, right? Remember, we're doing Dina de Malchuta Dina. The king says, the government says that, remember, this is the way I think this is the way in America a little bit too, right? If you don't pay taxes, you basically give the field to whoever pays the taxes, right? I think this happens sometimes where someone doesn't pay back taxes, someone else goes to the court and pays the taxes, and you get to keep the field. So that was the rule in Persia. Malka Amar, Man diyav taska leichel ara. Whoever pays the taxes gets to keep the land. And so basically these people were living on the land illegally without paying taxes. Illegal owners, which happens all the time, right, sold the field to someone else who might not have realized that they were illegal owners. And then a new guy came and said, okay, I'll pay the taxes. I want the field now. And that's why Rav Yehuda gave it to the second guy, not because when a person buys from a non-Jew and pays money but doesn't have a star, it's hefker and you can go get it. It was a specific circumstance because even the guy in this case, the non-Jew, really didn't own the field. So he sold the field to Reuben that he didn't really own. And therefore, when Shimon came and started working the field, he was basically working a field of hefker. Okay, let us keep going, right? I think we should keep going. Rav Huna, we are 5 lines from the bottom. Rav Huna zaven arami oved kochavim. Rav Huna, actually, this happened to him, right? Rav Huna bought a piece of land from a non-Jew, and again, the case is you pay the money. The non-Jew says, "Okay, thanks a lot. I'm going away. I'm going to go buy a new field." You haven't gotten a star yet. And Rav Huna doesn't own it, according to what we said, according to that opinion of Shmuel. Ata Yisrael acher rafik beporta. Another Jew comes, starting up with Rav Huna, and he works the field a little bit. So, and then he says to Rav Huna, "Sorry, I own your field." Ata the Kamed Rav Nachman. Now they came to Rav Nachman, and Rav Nachman was ukma biyadeh. Rav Nachman said, "Okay, the second guy gets to keep the field, like we just paskin from Shmuel." Amar lei, Rav Huna said to Rav Nachman, "Excuse me, sir, ma datech." Right? Why in the world are you taking this field away from me? Because, the Amar Shmuel, because we all know the famous dictum of Shmuel, and now we quote it again, last line, second last line, Nichse ovei kochavim harein kemidbar, that the property that you that you buy from an ovei kochavim that you don't have a star on, is temporarily like a midbar, it's hefker, v'chol machzik behem zocheh. And whoever picks it up, whoever does a chazakah, like working the field, gets to keep it. So that's why, says Rav Huna to Rav Nachman, you paskin like Shmuel, and you're taking the field away from me. But says Rav Huna, I'm no fool. I know that Shmuel said other things that would support me. Li Avid, turn to the top of Daf Nun Hey and Aleph. Li Avid lein mar ki idach to Shmuel. Why don't you paskin like a different halach of Shmuel? Remember that earlier today, this is a great halacha, right? Earlier today, we had a halacha where beginning of the end of Amud Aleph, where they had a field that was hefker, and Rav said if you work a portion of that field, then you own the whole field. Shmuel said if you work a portion of the field, you own where you worked. So if you're going to be consistent and give the field to this other guy because Shmuel says you do it, why don't you possibly like Shmuel and say he worked 5 feet of the field, let him keep 5 feet. I'm going to go keep the rest of the field. So it says, why don't you pass like the other halacha of Shmuel, Damar Shmuel, lo kana el makom makushel bilvad, that a person who works in a field only gets the part where you actually put the hoe in the field. So Rav Nachman said, well, it's true that Shmuel said that, but you know what? I'm going with a better authority than Shmuel, which is you, Rav Huna. Amar le b'hai. In this halacha, anna kishmadin svirle. I hold like you, Rav Huna. The Amar Rav Huna, Amar Rav, you yourself said in the name of Rav, which is how you must hold, that once you make one strike in the ground with your hoe, you acquire the whole field. And therefore, in this regard, right, just because I pass like Shmuel in one thing does not mean I have to pass like Shmuel in every single thing. So I'm going according to Shmuel, who says that if you have a transaction with a non-Jew and you pay money but don't get a star, basically the non-Jew left ownership of the field. You haven't acquired it and it's temporarily hefker. And if another person swoops in and does a kinyan, they get the field. But I'm also going to pass like this thing of Rav that you, Rav Huna, quoted from Rav, saying that if you make one small piece of effort in the field, you acquire the whole field. And therefore, I'm sorry, Rav Huna, but you are going to lose this field. We're going to stop here. We are 4 lines from the top and pick up there on Monday. I'll just point out there's a little bit of a debate in the Rishonim about what happens next, right? The non-Jew sold you a field, and because he didn't give you a star in time and took the money, basically you lost the field. So there are those who say, Tosa seems to say that you can go to court with the non-Jew, and he basically can go to the person who got the field, took it from Hefker, and say, you've ruined my transaction now because I was supposed to write a star. Now I'm not able to write my star, and you might be able to get the case reversed. But not everyone agrees with that. It's a little bit complex, but certainly you should be very cautious when you're doing business in this way, probably not to give the money until you actually write the star. Okay, everyone, thank you very much. I hope that was clear. Shavua Tov, and I hope next week we'll pick it up again live in person.